For most of human history, there were no cities, no kingdoms, no roads, no written language. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived as small groups of hunters and gatherers, moving across landscapes that were often wild, dangerous, and unpredictable. Yet from those humble beginnings emerged something extraordinary. Over time, humans learned to grow food, build permanent settlements, create governments, and share knowledge across generations. Villages became cities. Cities became kingdoms. Kingdoms became empires. Across thousands of years, countless people contributed to a story far larger than any single civilization. It is a story of discovery and innovation, a story of cooperation and conflict, a story of migrations, inventions, trade routes, revolutions, and ideas that transformed the world, from the first stone tools to modern computers, from small farming communities to vast global networks connecting billions of people. Humanity has undergone one of the most remarkable journeys in the history of life on Earth. Tonight, we will follow that journey. We will travel back to a time before civilization existed, explore the rise of the first cities, witness the growth of great empires, and discover how the modern world slowly took shape. This is not the story of one nation, one culture, or one people. It is the story of humanity itself. So settle in, relax, and join me as we explore one of the greatest stories ever told, the story of human civilization. Chapter 1. Before Civilization. Long before the first cities rose from the earth, before kingdoms ruled vast territories, and before written history recorded the achievements of humanity, our ancestors lived in a very different world. It was a world without roads, farms, or permanent homes. A world where survival depended on understanding nature. A world where every meal had to be found, every shelter had to be built, and every danger had to be faced directly. To understand the story of human civilization, we must first travel back to a time before civilization existed. The story begins hundreds of thousands of years ago. At that time, the earth looked both familiar and unfamiliar. Mountains, rivers, forests, and oceans already shaped the landscape, but the climate was often colder than it is today. Large ice sheets covered vast regions of the planet during periods known as ice ages. Sea levels were lower, exposing land bridges that no longer exist. The world was also home to remarkable animals. Woolly mammoths wandered across grasslands. Giant deer carried enormous antlers. Saber-toothed cats hunted prey in many regions. For early humans, these animals were both a source of food and a source of danger. Life was challenging. Human beings had not yet built cities or developed agriculture. Instead, they survived as hunter-gatherers. Small groups moved from place to place, following seasonal resources and adapting to changing conditions. These groups were often made up of extended families. A typical community might contain only a few dozen people. Everyone depended on one another. Cooperation was essential. A successful hunt could feed the group for days. A failed hunt could mean hunger. Knowledge became one of humanity's most valuable tools. People learned where animals migrated, they learned which plants could be eaten and which should be avoided, they observed weather patterns and the changing seasons. Over countless generations, this knowledge was passed from one person to another. Long before books existed, information survived through memory and storytelling. The development of tools played an important role in human survival. The earliest stone tools were simple, but they represented a major step forward. Sharp edges could cut meat more efficiently. Wood could be shaped into spears. Animal hides could be prepared for clothing and shelter. Over time, tool-making became increasingly sophisticated. Each improvement made survival a little easier. One of humanity's greatest achievements during this era was learning to control fire. The exact moment this occurred remains unknown, but its importance cannot be overstated. Fire provided warmth during cold nights. It offered protection from predators. It allowed food to be cooked, making it safer and easier to digest. It also created opportunities for social interaction. At the end of a long day, people could gather around a fire, share stories, and strengthen the bonds that held their communities together. The ability to communicate complex ideas became another powerful advantage. Language allowed knowledge to be shared with greater accuracy. Experiences could be passed to younger generations. Plans could be made. Problems could be solved collectively. While no written records exist from this period, language helped lay the foundation for everything that would come later. As thousands of years passed, humans gradually spread across the globe. 1950. A climbing German medium Galatid passing became Galata. As thousands of years passed, humans gradually spread across the globe. Our species originated in Africa, but groups eventually migrated into the Middle East, Europe, Asia, Australia, and eventually the Americas. This expansion took place over an immense span of time. Generation after generation moved into new territories, adapting to different climates and environments. Some lived in deserts, others settled in forests. Some learned to survive in frozen landscapes near the edges of great ice sheets. Human adaptability became one of the defining characteristics of our species. Wherever people traveled, they carried their knowledge with them. They developed new techniques. They created new tools. They adjusted to local conditions. Although separated by great distances, human communities around the world shared many similarities. They depended upon nature. They lived in relatively small groups, and they spent much of their time securing the resources necessary for survival. Despite the challenges, this was not a primitive or stagnant existence. Hunter-gatherer societies possessed deep knowledge of their environments. Many created complex traditions and social structures. Art appeared in various forms across the world. Some of the most famous examples survive in caves where people painted animals, hunting scenes, and symbols onto stone walls. These artworks reveal something important. Humans were not focused solely on survival. They also sought meaning. They expressed creativity. They told stories. Even tens of thousands of years ago, people were already displaying many of the qualities that continue to define humanity today. As the last ice age slowly drew to a close, significant changes began to occur. Temperatures gradually increased, glaciers retreated, ecosystems transformed, plants and animals adapted to the new conditions, human communities adapted as well. For thousands of years, people had followed familiar patterns of movement and survival. Now new opportunities began to emerge. In some regions, certain plants grew in abundance. Wild grains could be gathered in large quantities. Animals often returned to the same areas year after year. Gradually, some groups began spending more time in particular locations. The constant movement that had defined life for countless generations started to slow. No one at the time could have known it, but humanity was approaching one of the most important turning points in its history. A new way of life was about to emerge. The age of wandering was beginning to give way to the age of settlement. And with that change, the foundations of civilization would soon be laid. Chapter 2: The Agricultural Revolution. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. They followed migrating animals, gathered wild plants, and adapted to the rhythms of nature. This way of life had allowed our species to survive and spread across the globe. Yet around 12,000 years ago, something remarkable began to happen. In several parts of the world, people started changing their relationship with nature itself. Instead of simply collecting wild plants, they began growing them. Instead of hunting certain animals, they began raising them. It was a gradual transformation, taking place over many generations, but the consequences would reshape human history forever. Today, historians often call this period the Agricultural Revolution. It was one of the most important turning points in the story of civilization. Unlike a political revolution, it was not a sudden event. There was no single day when humanity abandoned hunting and gathering. Instead, small changes accumulated over centuries. People observed which plants produced useful seeds. They noticed that some seeds would grow if planted in suitable soil. They learned that certain animals could be managed, bred, and kept close to settlements. Little by little, knowledge became practice. Practice became tradition, and tradition became a new way of life. One of the regions where agriculture developed early was an area of the Middle East often called the Fertile Crescent. This region contained rivers, fertile soil, and wild grains that proved suitable for cultivation. Communities living there began harvesting and planting crops such as wheat and barley. As farming techniques improved, harvests became more reliable. For the first time in human history, people could produce a significant portion of their own food. Similar developments occurred elsewhere. In China, communities cultivated rice and millet. In the Americas, people domesticated crops such as maize, beans, and squash. In different parts of Africa and other regions, local plants and farming practices emerged independently. Agriculture was not invented once. It appeared multiple times in different places. Human societies across the world were arriving at similar solutions to the challenge of survival. Farming offered important advantages. A successful harvest could support larger populations than hunting and gathering alone. Food could sometimes be stored for future use. Communities became less dependent on constantly moving in search of resources. As a result, people began settling in one place for longer periods. Permanent villages appeared. What had once been temporary camps slowly transformed into lasting communities. This change affected nearly every aspect of daily life. Homes became more substantial. Instead of building shelters meant to last only a short time, people constructed structures designed for years of use. Families established deeper connections to specific locations. Fields, water sources, and grazing areas became valuable resources tied to particular communities. The domestication of animals played an equally important role. Dogs had likely accompanied humans for thousands of years, but now other animals became central to agricultural life. Sheep provided wool. Goats supplied milk. Cattle offered labor and food. Animals became partners in the new agricultural economy. Their presence expanded humanity's ability to produce resources and support growing populations. As villages expanded, new opportunities emerged. Not everyone needed to spend all their time finding food. Some people could focus on other tasks. They made tools, built structures, created pottery, developed specialized skills. This process, known as specialization, became one of the foundations of civilization. When individuals could dedicate themselves to specific crafts, societies became more productive and more complex. Trade also began to grow. Different communities possessed different resources. One village might have access to stone suitable for tools. Another might produce surplus grain. Others might create pottery or textiles. People exchanged goods, ideas, and knowledge. Networks of interaction slowly expanded. The world was becoming more connected. Yet the agricultural revolution was not entirely positive. Farming introduced new challenges as well. Life became more dependent on weather conditions. A poor harvest could threaten an entire community. Permanent settlements sometimes led to disputes over land and resources. Population growth increased competition. Disease could spread more easily among larger groups living in close proximity. The new way of life created both opportunities and risks. Nevertheless, agriculture continued to spread. Its advantages were simply too significant. Over time, villages grew larger. Populations increased. Communities became more organized. Leaders emerged. Rules developed. Cooperation on a larger scale became necessary. Managing irrigation systems, storing food, and coordinating labor required planning and structure. Human society was becoming more complex than ever before. Some settlements eventually reached sizes that would have seemed unimaginable to earlier hunter-gatherers. Hundreds of people lived together. Then thousands. Buildings became larger. Economic activity expanded, social roles diversified. The seeds of civilization had been planted. Although the people living through these changes could not foresee the future, they were laying the groundwork for everything that would follow. Cities, governments, written language, laws, monuments, empires, all of these developments depended upon the agricultural foundations being established during this period. The transformation was so significant that historians often compare it to the Industrial Revolution thousands of years later. Both changed how people lived, both altered economies, both reshaped society, and both marked the beginning of entirely new eras. By the end of the agricultural revolution, humanity was no longer living exclusively as wandering hunter-gatherers. Permanent settlements had become increasingly common. Population growth was accelerating. Trade networks were expanding. Communities were becoming larger and more organized. The world was changing. What began as small villages scattered across various regions would eventually give rise to something unprecedented: the first true civilizations, places where thousands of people lived together, governed themselves, recorded information, and built structures that would endure for generations. The age of farming had arrived, and soon the age of civilization would begin. Chapter 3. The First Civilizations. As villages grew larger and populations increased, human societies entered a new chapter in their history. For thousands of years, agriculture had transformed the way people lived. Permanent settlements spread across many regions of the world. Food production became more reliable. Trade networks expanded. Communities became increasingly organized. Now, in several places, something even more remarkable began to emerge. The first civilizations. Although historians debate exactly how a civilization should be defined, most agree that certain characteristics are important. Civilizations typically included large populations, organized governments, social structures, specialized occupations, trade networks, and systems for recording information. Most importantly, they allowed large numbers of people to live and work together in ways that had never before been possible. One of the earliest and most influential civilizations emerged in a region known as Mesopotamia. Located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq, Mesopotamia is often called the cradle of civilization. The rivers provided fertile soil that supported agriculture, while the surrounding landscape encouraged the growth of settlements. Over time, villages expanded into cities. Among the most famous were Uruk, and Babylon. These cities represented something entirely new. Thousands of people lived within their boundaries. Farmers worked surrounding fields. Craftsmen produced tools and goods. Merchants exchanged products from distant regions. Religious leaders oversaw temples. Rulers organized labor and maintained order. Life was becoming more structured and interconnected than ever before. One of Mesopotamia's greatest contributions was the development of writing. Before writing, knowledge depended almost entirely on memory and spoken communication. Now, information could be recorded. The earliest writing systems were relatively simple, often used to track goods, trade, and supplies. Over time, they became more sophisticated. Laws could be written down, stories could be preserved, knowledge could be passed across generations with greater accuracy. Writing transformed civilization. For the first time, human history could be documented rather than simply remembered. Around the same time, another great civilization was flourishing along the Nile River. Ancient Egypt developed in a unique environment shaped by one of the world's most important rivers. Each year, the Nile flooded its banks, depositing fertile soil that supported agriculture. The river provided transportation, food, and a reliable source of water. These advantages helped create one of the most enduring civilizations in history. The Egyptians built cities and temples. They developed systems of government and administration. They created their own writing system known as hieroglyphics. They produced remarkable works of art and architecture. Even today, monuments such as the pyramids remain among the most recognizable achievements of the ancient world. For thousands of years, Egypt stood as one of humanity's greatest centers of civilization. While Mesopotamia and Egypt are often highlighted because of their early development, they were not alone. Civilizations emerged in other regions as well. Along the Indus River in South Asia, large urban centers appeared. Cities such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa displayed impressive planning, including organized streets and sophisticated drainage systems. In China, settlements along major rivers gradually evolved into complex societies that would eventually give rise to some of the world's longest-lasting dynasties. Across different regions, human communities were independently developing many of the same ideas. Agriculture supported larger populations, governments coordinated large projects, trade connected communities. Writing preserved information. Civilization was spreading. As societies became more complex, new social structures emerged. Not everyone performed the same tasks. Farmers produced food. Craftsmen created tools and goods. Merchants facilitated trade. Religious leaders guided spiritual life. Government officials managed administration. This specialization allowed societies to function efficiently, but it also created differences in wealth, status, and power. For the first time, large populations lived within structured social systems. Governments became increasingly important. Large communities required organization. Fields needed irrigation. Trade routes required protection. Disputes needed resolution. Leaders developed laws and institutions to maintain order. Others controlled vast regions. One famous example of early law comes from Babylon. King Hammurabi established a legal code that was carved into stone and displayed publicly. Although many of its laws would seem harsh by modern standards, the code represented an important idea. Rules should be written down and applied consistently. This principle would influence legal systems for centuries to come. Religion also played a central role in early civilizations. People sought explanations for natural events, the changing seasons, life, death, and the forces they observed around them. Temples became important centers of community life. Religious beliefs influenced art, architecture, politics, and daily routines. In many societies, rulers claimed a special relationship with the divine, strengthening their authority. Meanwhile, trade continued expanding. Merchants traveled farther than ever before. Goods moved between distant regions. Ideas traveled alongside them. New technologies spread. Knowledge crossed cultural boundaries. The world was becoming increasingly interconnected. Civilizations learned from one another, even when separated by great distances. The achievements of these early societies laid the foundations for future generations. Writing made history possible. Governments created stability. Trade encouraged innovation. Cities became centers of culture, learning, and economic activity. Many of the institutions that shape modern life can trace their origins back to this period. Yet, civilization also brought challenges. Competition for resources sometimes led to conflict. Powerful rulers sought to expand their influence. Cities competed with neighboring cities. Kingdoms fought over territory. As populations grew and societies became wealthier, the stakes became higher. The age of small communities was ending. A new era was approaching, an era in which powerful states would expand beyond their original borders. An era of conquest, diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange on a scale never before seen. The first civilizations had demonstrated what humanity could achieve through cooperation and organization. Now those achievements would be tested as larger and more powerful societies began to emerge. The age of cities had arrived. The age of empires was about to begin. Chapter 4: The Age of Empires. The first civilizations transformed human society. Cities rose from fertile river valleys. Governments organized growing populations. Writing preserved knowledge. Trade connected distant communities. But as civilizations became larger and more powerful, a new force began shaping history: empires. An empire is more than a kingdom or a city-state. It is a political system that extends its control over multiple peoples, territories, and cultures. Through conquest, diplomacy, trade, or influence, empires bring vast regions under a single authority. For thousands of years, empires would dominate much of human history. Some lasted only a few generations. Others endured for centuries. All left their mark on the development of civilization. One of the earliest great empires emerged in Mesopotamia. As cities grew wealthier, rulers sought greater power. Neighboring territories became targets for expansion. Armies were organized. Campaigns were launched. Successful leaders brought larger regions under their control. Over time, powerful states rose and fell throughout the ancient Near East. The Assyrians became known for their military strength. The Babylonians became famous for their wealth and cultural achievements. Each contributed to the growing complexity of civilization, yet one of the most influential empires of the ancient world was Persia. Founded in the 6th century BCE, the Persian Empire expanded rapidly across a vast territory stretching from Egypt to parts of India. At its height, it became one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. Managing such a large realm was an extraordinary challenge. The Persians developed systems of administration that helped govern millions of people living across enormous distances. Road networks connected different regions. Messengers carried information between cities. Local customs were often respected, allowing diverse populations to coexist within the empire. The Persian example demonstrated that large and culturally diverse societies could be governed successfully. Around the same period, another civilization was developing ideas that would influence the world for thousands of years. Ancient Greece was not a single unified empire for most of its history. Instead, it consisted of independent city-states such as Athens and Sparta. These cities often competed with one another, yet they also shared language, religion, and cultural traditions. Greek thinkers explored questions about mathematics, philosophy, politics, and science. Figures such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle helped establish traditions of inquiry that continue to shape modern thought. The Greeks were not only warriors and rulers, they were also thinkers. Their ideas traveled far beyond their own cities. One of the most famous figures in ancient history emerged from the Greek world: Alexander the Great. In the 4th century BCE, Alexander led military campaigns that created an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt and deep into Asia. Although his empire lasted only a short time after his death, its influence was enormous. Greek culture spread across vast regions. Ideas, art, language, and knowledge moved between civilizations that had previously been separated. This cultural blending helped create new opportunities for learning and exchange. Meanwhile, another power was rising in the West: Rome. What began as a small city on the Italian peninsula gradually expanded into one of the greatest empires in history. The Romans built roads, aqueducts, cities, and administrative systems on a scale rarely seen before. Their engineers constructed impressive infrastructure. Their armies conquered vast territories. Their laws influenced generations of future governments. At its height, the Roman Empire surrounded the Mediterranean Sea and connected millions of people under a single political system. For many inhabitants, Roman rule brought stability and economic opportunity. Trade flourished across enormous distances. Goods moved between Africa, Europe, and Asia. Ideas spread alongside merchants and travelers. The Roman world became one of the most interconnected societies of the ancient era. Yet Rome's success also revealed a recurring challenge faced by many empires. The larger an empire becomes, the harder it is to govern. Communication slows, resources become stretched, political conflicts increase. Defending distant borders requires enormous effort. Over time, internal and external pressures weakened Roman authority. The Western Roman Empire eventually collapsed in the 5th century CE, marking one of the most significant turning points in European history. While empires rose and fell around the Mediterranean, important developments were also occurring elsewhere. In China, powerful dynasties unified large territories and established systems of government that endured for centuries. Chinese civilization produced innovations in agriculture, engineering, philosophy, and administration. The teachings of Confucius influenced social and political life throughout much of East Asia. Successive dynasties expanded trade networks and strengthened state institutions. China became one of the world's most influential centers of civilization. Trade routes connected many of these great societies. Among the most famous was the Silk Road. Rather than a single road, it was a network of routes linking East Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Merchants transported silk, spices, precious metals, and countless other goods. But trade involved more than products. Ideas traveled as well. Religions spread. Technologies moved between regions. Knowledge crossed cultural boundaries. A discovery made in one civilization could eventually influence another thousands of miles away. The growth of trade helped transform the ancient world into a web of interconnected societies. No civilization existed entirely in isolation. People exchanged goods, beliefs, technologies, and stories. The world was becoming increasingly connected. The age of empires was not only an age of conquest, it was also an age of cultural exchange. Many of humanity's greatest achievements emerged because different peoples interacted with one another. Knowledge accumulated over generations. Ideas built upon earlier ideas. Civilization advanced through both competition and cooperation. Yet, empires were never permanent. Every empire that rose eventually faced challenges. Some were weakened by economic problems, others struggled with political instability, some encountered powerful rivals, others became victims of their own success. History repeatedly demonstrated that no empire could last forever. By the end of the ancient era, many of the great empires that had dominated the world were changing or disappearing. New powers were emerging, religions were spreading across continents, trade networks continued evolving. The foundations of a new age were being laid. The ancient world had shown what large civilizations could achieve. Now humanity was entering a period that would reshape societies once again. A period of kingdoms, faiths, merchants, scholars, and growing connections between distant parts of the world. The age of empires was fading. The medieval world was beginning to emerge. Chapter 5. The Medieval World. When people hear the term Middle Ages or medieval period, they often imagine castles, knights, and stone fortresses rising above the countryside. While those images are certainly part of the story, the medieval world was far more complex than popular imagination sometimes suggests. It was a period of transformation, a bridge between the ancient world and the modern one. A time when civilizations adapted to changing circumstances, new powers emerged, and ideas continued to travel across vast distances. The medieval era began differently in different parts of the world. In Europe, it is often associated with the decline of the Western Roman Empire during the 5th century. As Roman authority faded, many regions fragmented into smaller kingdoms. Cities that had once thrived under Roman rule sometimes shrank. Long-distance trade became less reliable in certain areas. Local rulers gained importance. Communities increasingly looked to nearby leaders for protection and stability. Life for many people revolved around agriculture. Most families lived in rural areas rather than cities. Farmers worked the land, raised animals, and produced the food that sustained society. The rhythms of daily life were closely tied to the seasons. Planting, harvesting, and preparing for winter shaped the year. For ordinary people, survival often depended on successful harvests and stable weather. Yet medieval Europe was not simply a period of decline. Over time, new institutions emerged. Kingdoms became more organized. Trade gradually expanded. Population growth resumed. Towns and cities began to recover. The foundations of future European states slowly took shape. Religion played a central role in medieval life. In Europe, Christianity influenced education, politics, art, and culture. Monasteries preserved knowledge and copied important texts by hand. Churches and cathedrals became some of the most impressive structures of the age. Religious beliefs shaped how people understood the world and their place within it. At the same time, significant developments were occurring far beyond Europe. One of the most remarkable civilizations of the medieval era emerged within the Islamic world. Beginning in the 7th century, Islamic societies expanded across large parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. These regions became centers of trade, learning, and cultural exchange. Cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba grew into thriving centers of knowledge. Scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, engineering, and philosophy. Many ancient Greek and Roman works survived because they were preserved, translated, and studied by scholars during this period. Important advances in science and mathematics were made. New ideas spread across continents. Trade routes connected distant regions, allowing goods and knowledge to move between cultures. This period is often referred to as the Islamic Golden Age, and its influence can still be seen today. Meanwhile, China continued to flourish under powerful dynasties. The Tang and Song dynasties oversaw periods of prosperity, innovation, and cultural achievement. Chinese engineers and inventors developed technologies that would eventually transform the world. Paper became widely used. Printing expanded access to information. Gunpowder was discovered. The magnetic compass improved navigation. These innovations would later spread to other parts of the world, influencing global history in profound ways. Chinese cities became some of the largest and most sophisticated urban centers on Earth. Trade connected China to neighboring regions and distant lands through both land and maritime routes. In South Asia, powerful kingdoms and cultural traditions continued to develop. Across Africa, major civilizations and trading states emerged, linking different parts of the continent through commerce and exchange. In the Americas, societies were also growing in complexity. Long before European explorers arrived, advanced civilizations were developing agriculture, cities, trade networks, and systems of governance. The medieval world was not centered on a single region. It was a global story unfolding in many places at once. Trade remained one of the most important forces connecting these societies. Merchants crossed deserts, mountains, seas, and forests. They carried silk, spices, metals, textiles, and countless other goods. But they also carried ideas. Religious beliefs spread along trade routes. Technologies moved from one civilization to another. Languages, customs, and knowledge traveled with the people who journeyed between distant lands. The world was becoming increasingly interconnected. Universities and centers of learning began appearing in various regions. Knowledge accumulated across generations. Scholars studied mathematics, medicine, law, philosophy, and natural science. While information still traveled far more slowly than it does today, humanity was steadily building a larger body of shared knowledge. The medieval period also witnessed conflict. Kingdoms competed for territory. Empires expanded and contracted. Wars were fought for power, resources, and influence. Yet conflict was only one part of the story. Periods of peace often allowed trade, culture, and innovation to flourish. The history of civilization has always involved both cooperation and competition. As the centuries passed, important changes began reshaping the medieval world. Trade networks grew larger, cities expanded, new technologies improved agriculture and transportation, knowledge spread more widely, populations increased, people became increasingly connected to distant regions. By the late medieval period, the world was beginning to change once again. Merchants sought new trade routes. Explorers searched for opportunities beyond familiar horizons. Ships became more capable of long-distance voyages. Curiosity about the wider world continued to grow. The medieval era had preserved, expanded, and transmitted knowledge from countless generations before it. It served as a bridge linking ancient civilizations to the future. And as that bridge carried humanity forward, a new age was beginning to emerge. An age of exploration, an age in which oceans would connect continents, trade would span the globe, and civilizations that had developed separately for centuries would encounter one another on an unprecedented scale. The medieval world was drawing to a close. The world was about to become far larger than most people had ever imagined. Chapter 6: Exploration and Global Connections. For most of human history, the world felt vast. Mountains, deserts, oceans, and dense forests separated civilizations from one another. While trade routes connected many regions, countless people spent their entire lives without traveling far from home. Yet by the end of the medieval period, a growing number of merchants, rulers, and explorers were looking beyond familiar horizons. They wanted new opportunities, new resources, new trade routes, and new knowledge about the world. The desire to explore was not entirely new. For thousands of years, people had traveled across deserts, sailed along coastlines, and crossed mountain ranges in search of trade and opportunity. Ancient merchants moved goods between distant civilizations. Travelers recorded observations about unfamiliar lands. Explorers expanded the boundaries of what was known. But beginning in the 15th century, exploration entered a new phase. Advances in shipbuilding and navigation made longer voyages possible. Sailors gained access to more accurate maps. The magnetic compass improved navigation at sea. Ships became stronger and better suited to crossing vast oceans. These developments encouraged ambitious journeys into waters that many Europeans knew little about. One motivation for exploration was trade. For centuries, valuable goods such as spices, silk, and other luxury products reached Europe through complex trade networks. Merchants often relied on long chains of intermediaries, making these goods expensive and difficult to obtain. Many rulers hoped to discover direct routes to distant markets. Finding such routes promised wealth and influence. Portugal became one of the leading centers of exploration during this period. Portuguese sailors gradually explored farther down the west coast of Africa. Each voyage expanded geographic knowledge. Each expedition pushed beyond previously known limits. Eventually, Portuguese navigators discovered sea routes that connected Europe with parts of Asia by traveling around Africa. These routes transformed global trade. Meanwhile, another voyage would become one of the most famous in history. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean. His goal was to reach Asia. Instead, he encountered lands previously unknown to Europeans. Although millions of people already lived throughout the Americas, Columbus's voyage marked the beginning of sustained contact between Europe and the Western Hemisphere. The consequences would be enormous. The world was becoming more connected than ever before. Additional voyages followed. Explorers mapped coastlines. Merchants established trading networks. Empires expanded their influence into distant regions. Knowledge about geography increased rapidly. Maps became more accurate. People gained a better understanding of the planet they inhabited. One of the most remarkable achievements of the age occurred during an expedition led by Ferdinand Magellan. Although Magellan himself did not survive the journey, members of his expedition completed the first circumnavigation of the Earth. For the first time, sailors traveled all the way around the globe. The voyage demonstrated on a practical level just how vast the world truly was. It also revealed how interconnected it could become. As exploration increased, so did exchanges between continents. Historians often refer to one of the most significant examples as the Columbian Exchange. Plants, animals, goods, and ideas moved between the eastern and western hemispheres. Crops such as potatoes, tomatoes, and maize spread to Europe, Africa, and Asia. Meanwhile, horses, cattle, and other animals were introduced to the Americas. These exchanges transformed diets, economies, and societies across the world. Foods that many people consider ordinary today were once completely unknown outside their regions of origin. Global connections reshaped daily life. Trade expanded dramatically. Ports grew into major centers of commerce. Merchants transported goods across oceans on a scale never before seen. Wealth flowed between continents. Entire economies became increasingly linked. The age of exploration created opportunities, but it also brought challenges and hardships. Competition for resources intensified. Empires sought control over distant territories. Many indigenous communities experienced profound disruption as foreign powers expanded into their lands. Diseases spread between populations that had previously been separated for thousands of years. The results could be devastating. The story of global exploration contains both achievement and tragedy. It is a reminder that human history is often complex. The same voyages that expanded knowledge also produced conflict. The same connections that encouraged trade sometimes created suffering. Yet despite these difficulties, the long-term impact of global exploration was undeniable. The world became more interconnected. Goods moved farther. Ideas traveled faster. Knowledge spread across greater distances. For the first time in history, events occurring on one continent could influence lives on another. Civilization was entering a new phase. Scientific understanding also began to advance. As explorers gathered observations from around the world, people gained access to new information about geography, plants, animals, and cultures. Curiosity about the natural world increased. Questions were asked, old assumptions were challenged, new discoveries encouraged further investigation. The foundations for future scientific progress were being established. Meanwhile, growing trade networks created wealth that supported larger cities and more complex economies. Commercial activity expanded, financial systems evolved, governments adapted to a changing world. The pace of transformation accelerated. By the 18th century, humanity had reached another turning point. The agricultural societies that had dominated history for thousands of years were about to undergo a dramatic change. New technologies would alter production. Machines would transform labor. Cities would grow rapidly. The relationship between people and work would be fundamentally reshaped. The age of exploration had connected the world. The next age would change how that world functioned. Human civilization was preparing to enter one of the most revolutionary periods in its history, the Industrial Revolution. Chapter 7. Industry and Revolution. For thousands of years, most people lived in ways that would have been familiar to their distant ancestors. Farmers worked the land. Craftsmen made goods by hand. Travel was slow. Communication was limited by distance. While civilizations had achieved remarkable things, daily life changed gradually. Then, beginning in the 18th century, a transformation occurred that would alter human society more rapidly than almost any period before it. This transformation became known as the Industrial Revolution. It began in Britain, but eventually spread throughout much of the world. Its effects would touch nearly every aspect of human life. At its heart, the Industrial Revolution was a change in how people produced goods. For centuries, products had been made primarily by skilled individuals working with simple tools. Clothing was woven by hand. Metal was shaped in small workshops. Most manufacturing occurred on a relatively small scale. Now, machines began taking on tasks that humans had previously performed themselves. The result was a dramatic increase in productivity. Goods could be produced faster. Larger quantities became available. Costs often decreased. Entire industries were transformed. One of the most important developments was the improvement of the steam engine. Earlier versions had existed, but engineers refined the technology and made it more practical. Steam engines could power machinery. They could pump water from mines. They could drive factory equipment. For the first time, large amounts of mechanical power became available without relying entirely on human or animal labor. Factories soon appeared across industrializing regions. Instead of producing goods in scattered workshops, production became concentrated in large buildings filled with machines. Workers gathered in these factories to operate equipment and oversee manufacturing. Textile production was among the first industries to change dramatically. Cloth that once required long hours of manual labor could now be produced on a much larger scale. The impact was enormous. Industrialization encouraged the growth of cities. Factories required workers. Workers moved from rural areas in search of employment. Towns expanded rapidly. Some cities grew at a pace never before seen in human history. Urban life became increasingly important. This shift represented one of the largest migrations in history. For generations, many families had lived in farming communities. Now millions of people relocated to urban centers. The landscape of civilization was changing. Agriculture remained important, but cities were becoming powerful engines of economic activity. Industrialization also transformed transportation. For centuries, travel had been constrained by the speed of horses, ships, and human movement. Now steam power revolutionized transportation. Railways connected cities. Locomotives carried passengers and goods across great distances. Travel that once required days or weeks could now be completed far more quickly. Steamships improved transportation across rivers and oceans. Trade expanded as movement became faster and more reliable. The world seemed smaller than before. Communication improved as well. One of the most important inventions of the 19th century was the telegraph. For the first time, messages could travel vast distances almost instantly. Information no longer moved only as fast as a person or vehicle could carry it. News spread more rapidly. Businesses coordinated activities across larger areas. Governments gained new ways to manage growing nations. Civilization became increasingly connected. Industrialization generated enormous wealth and innovation. New industries emerged. Scientific research accelerated. Engineers developed technologies that reshaped everyday life. Standards of living improved for many people over time, yet the Industrial Revolution also created significant challenges. Factory work could be difficult and dangerous. Working hours were often long. Conditions were not always safe. Rapid urban growth sometimes produced overcrowded housing and poor sanitation. Societies had to adapt to changes that were occurring faster than ever before. Governments, workers, and business leaders debated how industrial societies should function. New political ideas emerged. Movements for reform gained momentum. Questions about labor, rights, education, and economic opportunity became increasingly important. The Industrial Revolution changed not only technology, but also the way people thought about society. During the 19th century, industrialization spread beyond Britain. Countries across Europe developed factories and rail networks. The United States experienced rapid industrial growth. Japan modernized and adopted new technologies. Industrial economies expanded around the world. Competition between nations intensified as governments sought resources, markets, and influence. At the same time, scientific discoveries continued to reshape human understanding. Advances in chemistry, physics, medicine, and engineering improved daily life. New inventions appeared with increasing frequency. Electricity began transforming homes and workplaces. Light bulbs illuminated cities. Telephones allowed voices to travel across great distances. The pace of change accelerated. By the early 20th century, humanity had entered an age unlike any before it. Machines powered industries, railroads connected continents, ships crossed oceans regularly, communication networks linked distant populations. The world was becoming more interconnected and technologically advanced. Yet the same innovations that brought progress could also be used in conflict. Industrial power transformed warfare. Nations possessed greater resources and more advanced technologies than ever before. The 20th century would witness both extraordinary achievements and devastating challenges. Still, when viewed across the long history of civilization, the Industrial Revolution represented something remarkable. In only a few generations, humanity transformed the way it worked, traveled, communicated, and lived. The changes were so profound that a person living before industrialization might struggle to recognize the world that emerged afterward. Civilization had moved from farms and workshops to factories and cities, from local economies to global trade networks, from handwritten messages to instant communication. The foundations of the modern world had been laid, and as the 20th century unfolded, humanity would enter yet another chapter in its long journey. A chapter defined by technology, globalization, and unprecedented connections between people across the planet. The modern world was beginning to take shape. Chapter 8. The Modern World. As the 20th century began, humanity entered a period of change unlike anything that had come before. For thousands of years, civilizations had grown gradually. Cities expanded. Empires rose and fell. Trade networks stretched across continents. New technologies appeared from time to time. But now change was occurring at an extraordinary pace. The modern world was emerging. Many of the developments that define everyday life today have their roots in the last century and a half. Electricity became widespread. Homes, businesses, and cities were illuminated after dark. Machines powered by electricity transformed industry. People gained access to technologies that previous generations could scarcely imagine. Communication underwent a revolution. The telegraph had already allowed messages to travel rapidly across great distances. The telephone added the ability to speak directly with someone far away. Later came radio, bringing information and entertainment into homes. Television followed, allowing people to witness events occurring thousands of miles away. For the first time in history, large populations could share the same information almost instantly. The world felt increasingly connected. Transportation continued advancing as well. Railways expanded. Automobiles became common. Airplanes transformed long-distance travel. Journeys that once required weeks or months could now be completed in hours. People goods, and ideas moved across the planet faster than ever before. The barriers that had separated civilizations for much of history continued to shrink. Scientific progress accelerated throughout the 20th century. Researchers expanded humanity's understanding of physics, chemistry, biology, and medicine. Vaccines helped prevent diseases that had once claimed countless lives. Medical technology improved diagnosis and treatment. Life expectancy increased in many parts of the world. Knowledge accumulated at a remarkable rate. Each discovery created opportunities for further discoveries. Education became increasingly important. As societies grew more complex, access to knowledge expanded. Schools and universities educated larger numbers of people. Literacy rates improved. Information became available to more individuals than at any previous point in history. The ability to learn, share, and build upon existing knowledge became one of the defining strengths of modern civilization. At the same time, humanity faced enormous challenges. The 20th century witnessed some of the most destructive conflicts in history. Advances in technology brought incredible benefits, but they also increased the scale and power of warfare. Entire nations became involved in global conflicts. The consequences affected millions of people. These difficult chapters remind us that progress is rarely simple. Human history has always contained both achievement and struggle. Yet even during times of conflict, innovation continued. New technologies reshaped society. Computers emerged during the 20th century and gradually became more powerful and accessible. At first, they were large and limited in their capabilities. Over time, they evolved into tools used by businesses, governments, researchers, and eventually individuals around the world. The digital age had begun. The arrival of the Internet transformed communication once again. Information could now move across the globe in seconds. People separated by oceans could exchange ideas instantly. Knowledge became available on a scale that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. A student could access information from distant libraries. Researchers could collaborate across continents. Businesses could operate on a global scale. The interconnected world envisioned by earlier generations had become a reality. Globalization accelerated these connections. Trade linked economies across the planet. Products were designed in one country, manufactured in another, and sold in many others. Cultural influences spread rapidly through media, travel, and communication networks. People became increasingly aware of events occurring far beyond their own communities. The world grew more connected than ever before. Humanity also achieved milestones once considered impossible. In 1969, astronauts landed on the moon. For the first time, human beings stood on another world. The achievement represented centuries of accumulated knowledge, innovation, and determination. From the earliest stone tools to spacecraft capable of leaving Earth, the journey of civilization had reached a remarkable new stage. Exploration continued not only across oceans and continents, but into space itself. Meanwhile, scientific understanding of our planet continued to grow. Researchers studied ecosystems, climate, geology, and the history of life. People gained a greater appreciation for the complexity of the natural world and humanity's place within it. The challenges facing modern civilization became increasingly global in nature. Environmental concerns, resource management, public health, and technological change affected societies around the world. Many of these challenges required cooperation across national borders. The interconnected world created new opportunities, but also new responsibilities. Today, billions of people live in cities connected by transportation networks. Information travels almost instantly. Knowledge is more accessible than at any previous point in history. Human civilization has become a global network of communities, cultures, and ideas. Yet despite all the changes, many aspects of the human experience remain familiar. People still seek knowledge. They still tell stories. They still build communities. They still work together to solve problems and create opportunities for future generations. The tools have changed. The scale has changed. The world has changed. But the qualities that helped early humans survive tens of thousands of years ago remain with us today. Curiosity, creativity, cooperation, adaptability. These traits helped small groups of hunter-gatherers navigate a challenging world. They helped farmers build villages. They helped civilizations construct cities. They helped explorers cross oceans. They helped inventors create machines, scientists expand knowledge, and astronauts reach the moon. The story of human civilization is ultimately the story of countless individuals contributing to something larger than themselves. Rather, it emerged through the efforts of billions of people across thousands of years. From the first stone tools to modern technology, from small camps beside ancient fires to cities filled with millions of people. From isolated communities to a connected global society. The journey has been long, complex, and extraordinary. And it is a story that is still being written. Every generation inherits the achievements of those who came before and adds its own chapter to humanity's ongoing story. The civilizations of the past shaped the world we know today. The choices of the present will shape the world of tomorrow. And so, after thousands of years of change, innovation, discovery, and growth, the story of human civilization continues.